Hello? 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 Is that too loud?
I don't know. No, I think it's all right. Do you think it's all right? Do you think it's all right?
Hello? Hello?
All right. Isn't that what is that actor's name? All right, all right, all right. I can't think of his name.
Oh,
Those are the Lincoln commercials.
yeah.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey.
There we go. All right, all right, all right.
Now,
Oh,
now
yeah,
he's in all these commercials with Woody.
Yep, I gotta squeeze the screen in here real quick. I can't see your fat head. Let's see here.
Well, I'm not scooted in very close.
No, you're okay. I did a software update today, which was like the worst thing I could have done. You know? It was bad. Yeah, still not working. See where you're at there? You got to scooch in a little bit. Come my way here, my way. You walk in my way. You know that thing. Oh, you're in now. Check that out.
Too much?
We're going to belly in. I think we're all right. All right. I think we're in. Looking over my right shoulder. I'm sweating like a pig. All right. That must mean it's 6:05. It is Wednesday night. It's Real Unfiltered Talk. I'm James Bryant alongside two-time world champion, bass fishing legend, sometimes catches crappie.
You work really hard at making me sound old. Legend. I mean,
How
is
about,
that what you do all week long? Think about how you're going to make me
ladies and gentlemen,
old
welcome to
or-
Real Unfiltered Talk, the host where we do everything that's unfiltered. I'm here alongside the 1998, 7, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Back 20-plus years ago, back when the fishing room knew what they were doing and they were really good, and now they're just kind of old and has been.
It was a lot easier then.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, that's better, I guess.
Nah, I don't like that one either. Speaking of dinosaurs.
We'll work on your intros. Yeah, no, don't call me a dinosaur.
Okay. Oh, I'm already there. I just fake it, Lloyd.
My ex-wife called me and Peter T. dinosaurs once.
Yeah.
It's the end of her.
That was wife beating time?
That's right. No.
No, I'm kidding. It's 6:06. It's Real Unfiltered Talk. I'm James Bryant alongside world champion angler, still going hard and strong. On the water, Mr. Dion Hibden. Dion, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
It's a
Doing
good
wonderful.
night. I got to do something with my hands here. I'm not liking that. See
Yeah.
that?
Like a Ricky Bobby deal.
I'm watching.
I don't
yeah.
know what to
I
do with
don't.
my
I
hands.
don't know what to do.
Just
but
hold them down to your side. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So, how was your week? Good.
Yeah, everything's good.
I titled the show tonight, I've Seen Fire and I've Seen Rain. That's the theme for tonight's
All
show.
right.
I was thinking, what the hell are we going to talk about? So I thought, we've seen a lot traveling around. I have a really good storm story to share.
Yeah.
But before we get there, we are here at the beautiful Lake of the Ozarks. We're at Bryant's Osage Outdoors inside the Legends and Liars pub. It's not quite a pub yet, but hopefully in about
It's real close, yeah.
8 days it will be. So, and then we'll start charging everybody for beer, and they can't keep drinking it for free. So that'll be nice. How about you? What's going on?
Not much. I got my eyes worked on, got both eyes cleared up. I'm feeling pretty good about that. I can see you. You're a handsome feller now that I look at you.
Getting-
I mean,
It's getting a little better. Not so foggy now, huh?
Yeah, it's not so foggy
Yep.
now. I mean,
Last week I called you old. What did I call you? Old foggy eye.
yeah.
Yeah, you had one good and one bad one.
Well, both of them are pretty clear right now.
Yep. Well, it's nice. The truth has finally come out.
That's right.
You've heard about it. Now you know.
That's
This
right.
specimen to your left,
That's right.
or left of the screen, is a good-looking old guy. Hey, I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. Special shout out. We'll talk about dinosaurs. There's an old legend here in the store tonight. Old Bill Badley is in the house tonight. Hey, Bill, how you
That's
doing,
right.
buddy? So I heard great news. Heard he was finally moving to Florida forever. So is that true?
Why is that good news?
Then we don't have to see him anymore. We've almost bought all the good tackle he's got
yeah, I
left.
started to
So
say he's almost got all of his
that
tackle.
that pile of
ready.
jerkbaits, that's Bill's.
Nice.
Yeah, so we talked him to come back. So we got his money back, selling him a pizza. So that's how much we gave him for his lures. So it's kind of nice.
I just want that one chartreuse one.
He found one. It was chartreuse with fish scales on it.
No, I'm talking about the one that's been had
Oh.
had the paint eat clear off of it.
So it was a fire tiger one.
There's a fire tigerman
He
in there
said,
that has
out of the
got
whole pile.
some experience.
So if everyone wants to think about this long and hard, there's 100+ jerk baits sitting on a table. And they're all in pristine condition. There's some really cool colors, the old Smith Wicks. And old Bill was nice enough, old Bill was good enough to sell them to us. So we were kind of picking and choosing through them, seeing which ones we wanted. And Dion says, I want that one right there. And in the middle was a Fire Tiger Storm Rogue, Fire Tiger in color, with almost no paint left on it. There it is.
That's right.
Why don't you hold it there in front of the camera, Dad? Just a little bit. I think it up higher. You guys see the screen here? There you go. There you go. See that thing?
Flip it over.
Flip it over there.
Flip it over and see every part of it.
Yep, so you can see it all. Well, you got to hit it in the camera. There you go. So Dion says, one that's used like that. Well, how'd you say it?
That's the one I want because that one's got experience.
He said that one's got experience. So there's something right about that one right there.
That one knows how to catch them.
So out of the pick, that's the one that knows how to catch them, and then he's got it weighted there in the nose, so you get that nose down kind of.
It don't matter. I mean, he's got a lot of them weighted, and stuff like that. I'm just telling you, you can look at that one. He throws that one whether he needs to or not.
So the lesson
he
here.
He believes in that one.
The lesson here is that's the one he picks out. That's the one that's going in my boat.
That's right.
So he doesn't get it either. Yeah. I caught a 7-pounder on that yesterday. He took a picture of it and showed Lloyd, and he took credit. Well, no, I'm kidding. Hey, it's good to see you, Bill. Appreciate it. You still guiding? Do you still guide? Don't guide? You never guided? See? Kinda. If anyone ever wants a lesson on the Osage River, give old Bill a call and pay a little bit of gas money.
That's right.
Show you how to do it. Pretty good guy. Some days. Every other Tuesday. So, anyway, I've seen fire and I've seen rain.
Yes, sir.
So, last night we had another, if this year couldn't be more screwed up about fishing, we're here at beautiful Lake of the Ozarks, and last night we had, well, you slept through it.
It didn't happen that bad where I live.
I got to tell you.
I live 10 miles that way.
You know what's really screwed up about fishermen?
What's that?
So we were right in the middle of it last night. I think that microburst missed us, Ed, by 200 yards probably. You don't know where I live. Never mind. It was close. Yeah, it was pretty close. Yeah, that's about 200 yards, and so we had a bunch of down trees, had a bunch of damaged property, a bunch of damaged cars. It looked like a tornado, but it wasn't a tornado. But last night, this is what fishermen do, or outdoorsmen do. So we have our master bedrooms in the basement. We have a little window on the side, but we're chilling out. Power's off. You hear the nice wind and rain kind of blowing around, and then it kind of gets with it a little more, and it's like it's about right. You're thinking to myself, man, I might push some shadow to a point. That kind of wind, be all right. And then I heard this boom, 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 like something tumbled over the top of the house. And I thought, ooh, that's not good. So you know what I did? I put on my rain suit and went out in the middle of the storm to see what was going on. That's what we do. So I went out there. It turned out it was the hot tub cover. It blew off the hot tub and launched up about 200 yards up the hill. So I had to drag it back down, put some bricks on it because there's little snaps to hold it down. I'm too lazy to fix them. So they got landscaping blocks to hold her down for the rest of the day. So, that's kind of here in Missouri. When there's a tornado, everybody goes outside to see where it's at.
Yeah,
so I had to don the rain suit last night to see how bad it actually was. And after I stepped over the trees that were down over the sidewalk, so I could get up to the hill to see, it wasn't all that bad. So tonight, and we didn't talk about it. You may not even have one, but do you have a storm story that was like so good you want to share? Because I've got like two during fishing.
I've seen lots of them, lots of storms. We were at Sam Rayburn one time, and big storm kind of blew in towards the end of the day, and we're all standing at the weigh-in, and somebody said, "Oh, looky there!" And at Sam Rayburn from Twin Dykes Marina, you can look up the lake, and you can look all the way to the bridge. And you look up through there, and I thought, "Oh, that's a big old cloud." And then I realized it wasn't a cloud; it was a tornado that was exactly as wide as the lake. And I'm like, "Huh, look at that!" So I walk up and I tell Ray Scott, I said, "Hey, dude, looky there." He turns around and he looks and he's like, "Okay, people, the weigh-in is officially closed. Every man for himself." He said, "Don't know where you're going to hide, but get to it right now." There was people there. I walked down to the bank and I said, "Dad," I said, "what are we going to do?" He said, "We're going to get in boats and we're going to run from it." He said, "We'll run up ash or something. We'll get away from it."
You say run up your ass?
Ash.
No, the ash. Sorry.
He said, we'll run up Ash Bayou or something. He said, we're going to get in them boats and keep our boats away from it because it's like the first day of the tournament. And we didn't want to, just go jump in the trucks and herd to safety and let our boats just get tumbled around. And there's about 4 or 5 of us. As I converged on Dad, and I said, hey, what are we going to do? And he said, we'll climb in my boat and drive up Ash and get away from it. And he said, you can see it coming. We'll just drive away from it. And I said, okay. I said, I'm right behind you, big dog. And about that time, Fishburne runs down there to us, and he said, hey, he told you guys to scatter. He said, it's all fun and games right now. Everybody's standing around oohing and on. He said, you wait till that son of a gun comes down here and starts pitching cars around. He said, you ain't going to be wanting to stand here now. Needless to say, everybody with some urgency jumped in their boats and like rats, everybody left. But they turned around and came back. And I've seen several tornadoes on the water, unfortunately. I saw the one in Minnesota, that their worst one that they ever had. More fatalities. Me and Dad were out on Lake Minnetonka, and my mom was actually on the north end of town, is where we were staying, and we're out there fishing, catching the devil out of fish, and pre-practicing. And I look up, I said, "Ooh, looky there! I think that's a tornado coming out." And it's one single black cloud floating around, and first thing you know, there's one little tornado comes out of it. He says, "Well, looky there, a twisty," and he said, this is going to be a little trickier here because you got big idle zones. I said, well, I think if that twisty gets down there, the idle zones are out. All right, I think those idle zones do not apply.
Twisties.
And needless to say, it kind of came at the lake, and then it slowly rose back up into the storm. And he says, well, maybe it's gone, And we called my mother and told her, said, hey, seek shelter. That thing can't be far from you. She said, oh no, everybody's running and hiding right now. And Dad says, well, just do that. We're fine. We'll get away from it out here on the water. And needless to say, he said, oh, look at it now. And we looked back up there, and the storm had three of them come down all at the same time. And it was one of those deals, it seemed like it took forever to move anywhere. And when they move slow, they get stronger and stronger. If they move fast, their storm actually stays kind of small and compact. But when they slow down, they really start grinding crap up. And it was the largest natural disaster in Minnesota history. There was like 40 people got killed, and there was one whole town one whole little burg on the north end of Minneapolis that got flattened. Yeah, it's a bad deal.
So when you reached him for that story, that was the best one you got.
Me and Lawson and Dad, we were
we're still going.
We were down in the Carolinas.
Before you start the story, I want you to know that got you beat so far.
We were down in
the Carolinas. I have a great story. So
we were down in the Carolinas, and Lawson had qualified for the youth championship, and me and Dad on another lake had qualified for the FLW championship, and we had taken the time to run over to the lake where Lawson was going to fish to put in a couple afternoons for him and try to figure out how to catch one over there. And as soon as we loaded the boat up on Lake Murray and headed over there, came on the radio, chance of some thunderstorms. Well, this lake is half the size of Pomme de Terre where the kids were going to fish. And Dad says, well, ain't that big a deal, a little bitty old lake, we'll just get off, if we start seeing something bad. We got out there and we fished, and we got to catch them a little bit. We got down by the low end of it, which you can see the whole thing. It's not a gigantic lake. And we're down on the low end, and you launch out of one launch ramp on the top end of it. And he says, why don't you call your mother and check on that weather? And I said, why? And I turned around, I look up the lake, and yeah, there's a big old gray cloud up there. And he says, well, just call and check on, see if there's any warnings. And Lawson says, warning? He says, I can give you a warning. He said, look at that damn tornado. And looked up there, and sure enough, here comes one right down the side of the lake, went right over the launch ramp where our truck's at, and about 5 or 6 other trucks. And it stayed right on the edge of the water, and it came all the way down, followed the edge of the lake, all the way down to where we were at. And, of course, Lawson's 12, 13 years old, and he's like, "Hey, what are we going to do when I get there?" Dad says, "We're going to go up there." He said, "We're going to avoid it." And and sure enough, it came down the lake and swirled around down there at the bottom, and Dad says, "Okay, let her rip. Let's go." And we take off and run up the upper end, and we get up on the upper end. Well, we can see the whole thing, and we're sitting there watching it, and Lawson says, "Is there any chance it could be coming back?" And I said, I wouldn't think. I think it'd keep heading at a steady pace somewhere else." And he says, "Well, you can think all you want," but he says, "I'm pretty sure my eyes are telling me it's coming back." And sure enough, it made a little old circle in the end of the lake and comes right back up, runs over the top of my truck again, and the parking lot. I'm thinking, well, we might have to stay out here on the boat because I'm sure our truck's destroyed. Got up there, and there was pits in the side of my Suburban. Didn't break out a window or nothing, but there was where it pitched the gravel around in that parking lot. It was pretty nasty.
Got it. Give it about a 5, 4 or 5, I'd say. Yeah, 5. Cal gave it a 5.
We were down at Table Rock, and one hit down there.
Try again.
And we were down at Table Rock. And,
this is storm number 6, by the way. Go ahead.
I've seen a lot of them, I'm telling you.
I've seen 5.
We were down at Table Rock, and one came into right there by 13. What's that marina where you used to take off out of?
State Park?
No. Yeah, they're in
Which one?
Kimberlin City. The last motel before you cross the bridge on the right.
The big one on the right, yeah.
Yeah, where
okay.
everybody.
Yeah, that place.
It's not a Hoy's. It might be a Hoy's. Anyways, doesn't matter. Is
that the one that Chips runs?
On the front. What?
Is that the one that Chips runs? Chips Ahoy?
Yeah, probably.
Sorry.
But on the front side
He's a little slow tonight, but we got it.
On the front side of it, that's where most of the guys had their trucks parked. Boats were in boat slips. And, mine wasn't in a boat slip. I was parked on the backside of the motel. And Don Dryling, a buddy of mine, his truck was parked on the front. And it was parked in between 2 other vehicles, just like you would park in a parking lot. I mean, there's that much space, just enough for everybody to open their door and come out. His was impaled at some point in time we didn't take DNA samples or nothing like that, but it had black hair, and I guess it was a dog, maybe. It was a dog or a small cow. We're not sure, but it had a perfect imprint in the side of his
door
Chevy pickup, and there was a perfect outline of it.
I mean,
it's like you had took police tape and went around this thing, and it's right on the side of his deal, and there was hair stuck to that truck, almost like it was driven into the paint, and no sign of the dog nowhere or
cow
or whatever. And but he came out, and Don's one of them ones that, if somebody, if his truck drives through a mud puddle, he cleans it off. He just likes his stuff to look nice. And he comes out and he says, "Hey boys, come over here and look at this." He said, "You guys are hunters and trappers." He said, "Tell me what that is." And I looked at him like, "It's a dog or a small cow. I can't tell." But I said, "It hit your truck really, really hard." He says, "Yeah, and look at this truck. Nothing had been touched on the one beside it on either side." But yeah, so it could have been. We were. Yeah, it tore the motel up. They told us, "Hey, we got this room over here." Everybody went over and huddled up in it, and it did sound bad, but
all right.
That's Hurricane Hugo. I fished in Hurricane Hugo.
Yeah?
It wasn't no fun.
Okay.
That was on the Potomac. There was like 13 or 14 boats didn't come in the last day.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that. Was that
my dad won. My dad came in to.
That's because the other 13 guys couldn't get back in.
No.
I'm sorry.
He had been catching them pretty good in the tournament. He was leading the tournament going out that day, and we were fishing in a bay called Quantico Bay, and or Occoquan. It's Quantico or Occoquan. Anyways, straight across the lake from where takeoff was at. But it's about 6 miles. And and I'm fishing on up in the little creek part of it. Dad was fishing over in another little bay in it. And we knew that the storm, they'd canceled one day, but the storm went in, hit the mountains, turned around, came back. And when it came back, it was blowing against the current. And we were sitting there, and about 10 o'clock, Dad comes to me, and I knew it was blowing, but I was up in a creek a little bit. And he comes to me and he says, "Hey," he says, "you got to watch what you're doing." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "That storm's happening." He said, "That boat ain't been by." And I said, "What boat?" He said, "Coast Guard boat." And I said, "No, Coast Guard boat ain't been by me yet." He said, "Well, he's coming." He said, "Trust me." He said, "You better not let him see you." He said, "Have you got him?" And I said, "I got one big one." And I said, "How about you? Have you got him?" He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "I'm headed back right now." I said, "It's 10 o'clock." He said, "Dude, I got 20 pounds on the boat. That means somebody's going to have to catch 30 to beat me." He says, "I'm going in." He said, "I'm going to cross." And he said, "I came in here to see if you wanted to go with me." I said, "Oh, hell, it ain't that bad." He's like, "Well, just don't let it catch you." And he said, "If I'm not mistaken," he said, "don't let that boat catch you either." And I'm tucked back in some boat docks, and I flip around there and I catch another one. So now I got a 6 pounder and a 2 pounder. Well, a 6 pounder on the Potomac's like a 10 pounder anywhere else. That's a big one. And so I got two pretty good ones. And needless to say, Dad told me, he says when he left, he says, if you have to, he said, go in there where I was at. He said, they was biting when I left. He said, I got 20, you know. And well, when the guy that's leading the tournament says, "Hey, just take my spot," I thought, "My golly,
I'm going.
I'm taking your spot." And so I run over there and run in his spot and get in there. I don't know, about 11 o'clock, 11:30, something like that, and immediately catch two more 6 pounders. I got 3 over 6. I'm like, "Holy crap! I got to get one more." You know, if I catch one more of anything, and needless to say, we plundered around, and finally we got back out where we could see the main body of water. And we had fished by that morning. There's a peninsula that kind of comes off the side that we fished along. It's got a good little steep creek channel goes in next to it, and we had fished by it that morning. And it's got decorative trees, you know, little saplings that are planted all along it just for show. And it's right by a big old marina. And I look out there, and I thought, that looked like one of them trees just fell over. And one of the decorative trees just went down in the water. I'm like, "It's not blowing that hard, is it?" He's like, "I don't know. That's not the first one." He said, "I seen it a while ago." And I said, "You seen what?" He said, "I seen one of them trees blow down." I said, "We fished by there earlier." He said, "Yeah, you can't see over the top of it. You know, you could not see over the top of it. That's how tall it was."
Like a big berm.
Yeah. And I got to watch it, and I thought, "Oh, there's another one. Just timber down in the water." And I'm like, "What is doing that?" And then in comes this Coast Guard boat. And when he came in, I just tucked back behind the dock. I said, "Sit down." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because that son of a bitch is fixing to tell everybody no boats leaving, you know, restrict boat traffic." He's like, "Oh, they can't do that." I said, "It's the Coast Guard. He can do what the hell ever he wants." And I said, "I don't need a ticket right now, but so I got 4 that weighs about 20. And he says, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Well, we're going to wait till he goes on up in that creek with all them marinas, and we're going to get our ass out of here." And he said, "Well, I thought you said you didn't want a ticket." I said, "I'm not going to let him catch me. You know, we are going to go while he's not looking." I said, "It'll be a little shuck and jive, but we'll get out of here." He goes on up in there, and I put away all my rods, and I encouraged him to do the same because, you know you're going to take one over the nose. It's just going to happen. And we take off, and when we got to that point where that berm was at, they're 12, 14 feet high. I don't know how big they are. Never seen nothing like that. And I've been on Lake Erie. I've been to the North Shore of Hawaii once, and I'm not sure I ever seen anything like that. But we go into them, and we pound our way out into them for, you know, seemed like an hour, you know, and every other wave come over the nose of the boat, and it was just miserable going, and get almost all the way across, and when you got over there close to the mouth of the takeoff cove, everybody, you would get in a trough and you would run one way, you would tack with them for a ways, and then you would climb up over the top of that wave and you tack the other way to get away from the shoreline. Well, when you get over there, there's 100 boats in the tournament and everybody's doing that. Okay, every now and then you look up coming down a swell, there's one coming at you this way. All right, somebody's got to swap lanes. So you would have to climb up over the top of that wave and go in the next one, hoping that there wasn't one going or coming in the next one. So it was a little tricky right there in front of takeoff. But got over to the, pulled in, and when we got over there, there's not, there's lots of places to fish, but I pulled in and I seen Dad, and so I thought, well, I'll put his mind at ease. So I pulled right to him. He said, a little sketchy out there, huh? I said, just a little bit, yeah, a little bit. He said, you get them? I said, yeah, I got 2 more big ones. He said, well, that's awesome, and he says, well, pull in right here and you might get your 5th one. And I could not stand up. My lower half would not work. And I pounded them waves so long that I couldn't get out of the seat. And I wallered around there in the boat from side to side, and it took 30, 45 minutes before I could actually get to my feet. My partner, he sat there the whole time. He's like, I might not be able to move ever. I said, well, let's just relax, and finally got to my feet and stood up and fished around a little bit, but there was like 14 boats didn't come in that day.
That's better.
Chet Douthit and Paul Elias. Chet Douthit and Paul Elias saved one of them windsurfers. Some of them guys was out there windsurfing in that crap, and they go to change lanes. There's a boat coming at them, so they go to change lanes and get up on top of the wave. And when he got up on top of the wave, Chet says, there's a head right there. He's like, holy crap, that's a person. And he said, luckily enough, Paul kind of steered away from him, and Chet says, did you see that? Paul said, yeah, it was a guy. And he said, well, you got to turn around. He said, I don't know what's going on, but he said, we got to try to get him. And Paul gets swapped around and heads back down the deal. And Chet said the guy started swimming, and Chet hangs over the side of the boat. Chet played for the Miami Dolphins. And he leans over the side of the boat, and they can't get off plane. If they get off plane, the boat's they're gonna swamp you, and so they creep up on him as slow as Paul can go. They're running about 30 miles an hour. Chet sticks his arm out. That guy and him lock arms, and of course the drag of the boat drags his ass up on the back deck of the boat. They make it to the way. They bring him in, and but there was like 13 boats that didn't come in that day. Huh?
It raised the caliber of the score.
Bit, yeah.
Yep. All right, you good now?
I've been in some bad stuff.
Yeah.
I've been in some bad water in my life. That's why I cripple around now. At 57 years old, I can't hardly walk.
Do you want mine where we saved a guy, or do you want my Kentucky Lake story?
Oh, both. You got to save your guy?
I got to save the life story.
Nice.
Yeah. So Travis Bullock and I were fishing crappie tournament up in Truman, and just to be clear, he's got at the time he had about a 22-foot metal boat, and he built a big deck across the front of it. It was huge, and I always said it was the world record of the most expensive boat ever built. Because
first $100,000 John boat.
That's right. It was a $100,000 John boat. I mean, and we're all laughing, but kinda. So we're running down the main channel lake coming out of State Park, and you turn to go down there, and that wind can be kind of notorious.
Sure.
And we hit one of those little micro storms, where they just come straight down. The wind's like flat, and so like the good partner I am, I get under the deck because that's a great place for me to be.
It's not your boat.
Yeah, he's getting pelted with a needle rain.
Right.
And we don't have any masks, we don't have anything. And matter of fact, it was about 80 degrees before, and we were pre-fishing. We were drinking beer. So, I'm climbing underneath, and I'm staying warm, and he's going to take a beating. Well, he shuts down. Like, we're running along, he just shuts it down out in the middle of the lake. And when I climb out and look, we're in the middle of a debris field. There is coolers and life jackets and just trash along the water. And we couldn't see 10 feet in front of the boat. So he's like, what the hell is this? I said, I have no idea. And as we get up further, there's about a 20-foot boat capsized. And all you see is the bottom of the hole. And we don't see anybody. I mean, it's like there's something going on. So as we go around the back of the boat, there is a young boy standing on the swim deck on the back of the boat. And he said, my dad is still out there. And I told Travis that this is not going to end well. I said, we're not going to find this guy. So we grab up the kid, put him in the back of the boat, and we drop trolling mode. We start idling around. And as we're circling the boat, we see I would only say this much of his face in the water, and he's got a koozie cup under his chin. And he says in a very faint voice, I can't swim.
Oh.
So he's floating by his chin on a koozie cup. So we troll over to him and reach down when we grab him. And Travis is a pretty stout guy. If you guys don't know Travis, he's a buddy of ours. He's probably, 220?
Yeah.
Works out. He's a decent built guy. I'm 125, wet.
Plays with concrete all day.
Yeah, he pumps poop. But anyway, he reached down when he grabs him, he pulls him up. And I'm not picking on Dion, but he was as big as you. A big guy. And we really didn't know how we were going to get him in the boat. But adrenaline does wonderful things.
Yes.
So for reasons I can't explain, maybe faith, whatever, we slid him up in the back of the boat, and he filled the entire back deck of the boat. So we went over to State Park, pulled in, called the ambulance. They came down. No big deal. We were at the right place at the right time. So we called tournament director, and we say, hey, we're running late. We found a capsized boat on the water. We had to do a little quick, pull him out of the water and get him back, so we'll be right back. And he's like, what do you mean? So explain the story. He says, okay. So we go to registration. If you're late for registration, you're disqualified. So we had our get out of jail free card because we actually had, we were there. So when we get there, they start talking about sportsmanship, and then the tournament director stood up, who was Paul at the time, and he said, I just want to take a moment to recognize what sportsmanship and being aware of everything, and he's trying to recognize us. And he says the story as Travis leapt into the water. He swam miraculously through the storm, and he pulled him out of the water, and that's what men do. Stand up and give him a big round of applause. And we're both sitting there going, that's not quite how that happened, but so he gets down.
That's a much better story.
It was a great story. I was like, I wish I would have been there. It was like super cool. And so he gets down. Meanwhile, his co-owner at the time was back doing something else, and he comes in, and he hadn't heard Paul tell the story. So he goes through the whole thing again. These men are heroes. They leapt into the water. They used come-alongs and chains and petroleum jelly, and they made a floating device, and they built it. Like, what the hell's going on here? So we became heroes for a day. But
the koozie cup never came up.
No. The guy was on his last breath, and we took whatever you couldn't get through. The funny part of the story was when we pulled into the state park dock, his boat's so big that it wedged in the slip. And we couldn't get it out for a while, but when the ambulance came down, they brought a defibrillator. And they were like, hey, if he starts to crash, we'll give him a little jolt. And Travis is like, he's grabbing stuff. He's like, I'm getting the hell out of this boat. And he's like, what? He said, it's a metal boat. We're soaking wet. He's like,
right.
He's got a defibrillator. And EMSs, they might save your life, but they're not that damn smart. Let's get out. I'm like, great.
We'll watch from a distance.
Yeah, he's like, who'll watch us from up on deck, So we're soaking wet. We go up there's a gift shop up there. And like, man, do you have like a shirt or something? Like, yeah, $25. We had to buy $25 shirts just to dry off to get up there. So that's my Truman story of being the hero for the day.
That's a good one.
That's not the best one.
Much better than mine.
It's not the best one.
Really?
Yep.
Holy crap.
So Kentucky Lake was better. And if we haven't discussed before how my relationship with the Hibden family kind of came to be, it all came through their mother, your mother. We didn't really know each other all that well at the time, but Stella had bullshitted him enough to where I was going to come over to the house and they were going to help me out. It's a great thing. And she did it. So this was before live technologies, before really good GPS. It was paper map time. That's how we kind of learned things. So I would go meet with Dion. He would talk about places we used to fish in the past, places that work, what to look for. And then I would meet with Guido on occasion, and he'd give me that fatherly more advice, from somebody that's been out there and kind of knew things. So we were going to go to Kentucky Lake, and we got our game plan together. It was right about the spawn time. And if anybody knows about Kentucky Lake, there's really two lakes that run parallel to each other. There's Kentucky Lake, and then there's Lake Barkley. And then there's a big, long strip of land in between. It's called the land between the lakes. That area is full of buckbrush, Most of it at the time, and back in 2000, was mostly undeveloped. There's a couple of sailboat parks, but I think it's still pretty much that way.
A few little state parks.
Little state park stuff, but very undeveloped, but a really great place to fish. Salty or sandy, silty. So I made up my mind I was going to fish the LBL side. I was going to flip buckbrush and look for some spawning fish. And lake was relatively low. And we got this game plan together and kind of what we're going to go and what we're going to look for. And Guido says, now, there's one more thing we need to talk about. And I said, what's that? And he said, when that wind comes straight down that system, he said, you got one choice. He said, you can go out in the lake and die, or you can put it on the bank. And he said, if that wind starts to talking, you put that boat on the bank. And I kind of thought that was kind of surprising from Guido, because, these are guys that aren't afraid of weather. He says, that one will kill you. He said, that lake will get you. He said, so just remember that. It gets bad. He said, put that boat on the bank. So, okay. So I went out and fished. It was a beautiful week. No call for really a lot of weather. And, of course, the first day of the tournament, thunderstorms coming in. Typical, because everywhere in my professional short career, I either have breakdowns or tornadoes. That's kind of how my season went. So we're at Kentucky Lake, and we draw partners the night before. And the first day I went out, I got into a fight with Kobe Krieger and blew my lower unit out. So day 2, I'm kind of like, I'm not going to go far, but I'm going to go about 5 miles down. And there was this cove called Higgins Bay. I'll never forget this, because Higgins Bay, and there's a little island out in front of it, and on the top of the island, there's a graveyard. And it's called Brown County Cemetery. And I was really fascinated by it, but the smallmouth had started to pre-spawn around that area. So the day 2 partner who came up to me at the time was twice as old as Lloyd. He was about 190 years old. And his name was Walt. And for argument's sake, he was 84 years old. And he was a very small, frail man. He's 85 years old. And so I introduced myself, and I said, "Are you my fishing partner?" He said, "Yes." And I said, and you don't want to like pick on somebody, but it's like, how old are you? Because I thought he was gonna have 2 people kind of holding by his arm to help him get in the boat. And he says, "I'm 84." I said, "Why in the world are you fishing at 84?" He said, "Well, let me tell you something." He said, "I spent the most of my life drinking, partying." I said, "Oh, I even did a few little drugs here and there." And he said, "I've done everything." He said, "But I always thought in the later years I wanted to fish." He said, "So I decided to fish competitively." And he said, "And I found the Lord." And I said, "Okay." He says, "So I'm going to go out here and enjoy nature and be one with him." And I said, "Perfect. Sit over there, throw your shit in, let's go." So we load up. Oh, we got a whole gaggle coming in, Mike. And I can even put it on hold here, but I think they're going to leave. So anywho, we go out and we go down to Higgins Bay. And I'll wait till Mike gets back because he wants to hear it. I know he wants to hear it, so I'm waiting on you. So we go out and we go down to Higgins Bay, and we're going to catch these fish, and we pull in, and it's sunny. It's nice. And if anybody knows Kentucky Lake, it can come pretty quick.
Yep.
So in 2000, the rules were you could communicate angler to angler, but you couldn't use your cell phones. That was the kind of the thing. And we're tooling along, and it's kind of breezy, and it's nice. And we're catching short fish, and my cell phone rings. And I always kept it in the glove box of I had a dual console Ranger. It was one of Guido's old boats, and I reach over the console, look at it. It's my mom. And my mom had traveled with me because she liked to go and stay in a hotel and sew. And we always got lakefront cabins. She would sew, enjoy the weekend. I go fish. So it's tournament day. It's day 2, and she calls. And you're not supposed to answer phone unless it's an emergency. And I thought, well, my mom never, ever calls me. So she says, "James," and it was James, not Jamie. She says, "Where are you at?" And I said, "Mom, fish tournament." She said, "Where are you at?" And as like a sarcastic ass, I'm like, "Well, I'm in Higgins Bay. I'm 5 miles downstream. I'm on the other side of the LBL." And she said, "There's tornado about to hit you on the head." And I went, "What?" And she said, "You need to get out of there. We're watching a tornado go right down the middle of the land between the lakes heading south. We can see it, and we were at the moors."
Uh-huh.
She goes, "We can see it, and they're all saying if you're over in the LBL, you need to get out of there." And I said, "Mom, it's sunny." And about that time, you see the treetops start to just flutter. And I went, "Huh." So I look over at Walt, and I said, "Hey, I think there's a storm coming." And he says, and I'll never forget this, he said, "Don't worry about it. We're going to be all right." I said, "Okay." Now, you said you've seen a lot of things. This is the only time in my life I've ever seen this. In a matter of about 45 seconds, the trees were almost flat. And they were big oak trees, and they were starting to lean. And the wind was like whistling over it. And I saw lightning with my own eyes between me and the crowd here. make these blue arcs and hop across the bank. And they were like, when they were shooting across, and they crawl up a tree. And I said, Walt, we're going. And he said, I'm 85 years old, and the good Lord's going to take care of us today. I paid my dues. And I said, and you guys hit the mute button if you have kids watching the show. I said, well, Walt, I have some fucking dues to pay. Let's go. I said, we're going. So
I'm not paid up yet.
no, I still got dues to pay, buddy. We're out of here. And I said, you reel it up. And he's still fishing. I mean, I'm kind of looking at it going, I've never seen anything like this, but we're going. Now,
it's like the preacher on Caddyshack.
Yes.
Still playing.
That's right. And if we would have stayed there, we would both been dead. I promise you would have been dead. Now, if you heard Dion's story about running the waves, remember that. So we're in about 2 foot of water. And I light it up and put it on plane. So I'm throwing mud and silt, and we're hauling ass out. And it kind of makes like if anybody plays golf, it's kind of a dog leg. You know, you kind of go down a stretch, and you got to turn to get to the main lake. And I was making this turn, I'm looking out. And it's white capping really good. And I'm looking behind me, and it's really bad. I mean, there's literally branches flying like in the air. And I'm running about 50 miles an hour, and I'm looking, and the Kentucky Lakeside, barges run up and down the river. Now, if anybody's ever been around barges, there's 2 kinds of barges, an empty one and a full one. And the way you can tell is how they sit in the water. This barge was pushing upriver, and the whitecaps were coming down. It was empty, which means it was about 10, 12 feet tall?
10 foot tall, yeah, at least.
And he was stabbing waves. So those rollers were about 10 to 12 feet tall. And Walt says, you're not going out there. And I said, I am not going back. And he says, we're going out there. And I said, you paid your dues, buddy. Let's go. You know, and I'm yelling between the needle of rain and, I'm trying to be calm, but I'm like, this is bad, bad, bad. So unlike Dion, I had never heard the story about getting up over a wave. Now, I was running a 20-foot boat with a 225. A 10-foot roller, if you guys are into physics, a 10-foot roller, if you turn to go up it with a 225-horse outboard and a 2,000-pound Ranger, it don't do so well.
It's all it can do.
And in my case, it could not. So I tried to get up over it, it wouldn't go, so I had to kind of get into it, and I felt like a surfer. You kind of get in it, but as I'm looking to my left, I swear on the health of my family, I could see the bottom of the lake, the ground, because it was rolling up and I could see rocks. And above me was a 10-foot roller, and I had nowhere to go except riding it 3 miles downstream until I could finally get it turned up. Now, when I finally got it turned up, there was a spot where I could get the boat turned up, and I got it up, and I would go over one, and I would go through one. So in other words, I would go up, and my boat would over-rev because it come clear out of the water, and then I'd hit the second wave, it would stab the water, it would skip up a little bit, and it'd get enough bite to get to the next one. And I did that for about 7 miles. I think that's about what it is to Morris from there. 3 miles down, it's about 7 miles. The long or the short is we made it back. I blew my second lower unit in 2 days. And when we stopped, like you, I could not take my hands off the steering wheel because I was squeezing it so hard. And I was so scared that by the time we got back, I couldn't get my hands opened up off the wheel. It took me about 3 minutes. And Walt never mentioned the Lord again. That show. True story. So that's my storm story. 2 days, 2 lower units, big storms. And that was probably the most harrowing experience I've ever seen. And that's true story.
It can get pretty nasty out there.
And the whole thing was Kobe Krieger's fault. So there. He's still a dick in my book, and he's your buddy.
We were at Lake Mead. We were at Lake Mead.
Oh, you're gonna try to one up it now? No, now that you got a good story going?
No, I can't.
Better,
one up
right?
that. That's better.
That's a good story.
Good stuff.
All right.
There's lives saved and everything else.
That was 2 stories intertwined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were at Lake Mead and
did you ever find a dead guy?
Once.
Once? All right. We'll go to that one maybe another day. We'll call it Dead Soldiers. Go ahead. Anyway.
Lake Mead. We went out there and it was 98, 97, 98 because I had won the Classic and that year and that year they had upped the horsepower rating. Whatever your boat was rated for, up to a 250 you could run it. And I rigged a really nice, 521 with a 250 on it. I mean, it was an awesome boat. And I was coming back through Tennessee and a guy walked up and he says, "Wow, that's a slick looking boat." And And he said, "What's one like that run?" And I looked at my mother, and my mother spouted off a price. And he says, "Is it for sale?" And I said, "Yeah, we'll be here in just a few months." He said, "Well, how about I give you an extra 10 grand and I take it from you now?" And my mom says, "Sold." Son of a gun, Mom. We gotta leave. We gotta leave for the next tournament in a week. Well, I still had my 461, which was rated for a 175 at home. I had my old boat, and
That was almost a fishing ski.
yeah, that I hadn't sold.
They have the big bench
And-
seats in the front.
No,
What? That had a deck.
no, it was
Alright.
full deck.
Just asking.
It was in '97. It was cream of the crop,
Okay.
and so I call Evinrude because the motor was messed up on it somehow, and I called Evinrude and I said, "Hey, what's the chance of me getting another motor for that boat before Lake Mead?" And she said, Lake Mead's next week. I said, "Yeah, trust me, I know."
Mom's on my boat.
But I said, also, my mother sold my boat right out from under me. She said, "What?" And I told her the whole story, and she said, "I'd have done it too." And needless to say, get home, another motor's waiting on me when I get home, get the boat rigged out and everything, go to Lake Mead and get out there, and a fuel filter deal that was in the boat had some troubles and didn't get to hardly practice. Peter T and Kenyon Hill were both catching them pretty good, so they told me what to do. I never got to practice a minute, not one. And but I'd fished Lake Mead several times, so I kind of knew my way around. And Peter T and Kenyon told me what to throw, kind of what to look for, and so I thought, well, to get my boat fixed, everything will be great. So I got my boat fixed, drawed a guy who had never been there before. He flew in that night, and so he didn't have a boat, didn't have no place to go. So I said, well, let's just go fishing. So we take off, we run up the lake, go to Temple Bar area where I've always fished, got back in there. Shoot, first thing I know, come in that day, and I'm in like third place. And so, Pete and Kenyon both hate me because, they're not that high up. And here, I never practiced a minute, and I'm doing good. Second day of the tournament, wind starts blowing, and they said, "What's it going to be like?" I said, "Oh, trust me, it's big, it's bad, it can get really ugly." And we go up. I go up the lake, catch another good stringer of bass, and about noon, I told my partner, I said, "We're going to head back." I said, "It's going to be ugly. Somewhere between here and there, there's going to be a stretch of bad road." And I said, "We're going to have to drive through it." And I said, "It's not going to be no fun." Because, here I'm in the smallest Ranger pretty much in the freaking tournament just because my mom sold my boat. And get down the lake, and sure enough, it's bad. When we went to cross the main basin going into what they call the Narrows, which you go through about a 10-mile stretch of what they call the Narrows, which is in between two mountains. You follow through it. And before that, it was, 7, 8, 9 footers, lots of big waves. Made it to the Narrows. I get all the way through the Narrows, and when I get to the far end of them, here sits Charlie Campbell. Everybody knows Charlie Campbell, Charlie Campbell, at that point in his life,
I don't know Charlie Campbell.
truly loved to go fast. He's been with Nitro and all of them as long as they've been going, and they would always build him a boat that was going to be faster than everybody else's. Simple as that, because he liked going fast. Now Charlie he was old then, and he's floating right before you break out of the Narrows into the big basin of water that you've got to cross about 10 miles to get to Vegas Wash where we weigh in. And we get there, and I see him, and I thought, well, he's having some trouble. So I pull over to him because I've actually been his roommate. We've roomed together around the country. I pull over to him. I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "I can't make it." So what do you mean you can't make it? I said, "Something broke?" He's like, "No." He says, "I've tried it 2 or 3 times." He says, "I can't make it." And I said, "Well, why?" He says, "Oh, they're just too big, too windy." And I mean, he's white, like scared white. And I mean, this is the guy that's been bass fishing his whole life. He says, "Oh, I don't know, they're just too big. I can't do it." I said, "Well, I'm going in." I said,
Follow
"Do you
me.
want me to follow you, or what do you want to do?" And he says, "Oh, I don't know." He says, "I guess I can try it one more time." He said, Benzo, you're here. If I go down, you can at least stop and get me. I said, whatever you want to do. His boat was light enough that he would come off one of them big waves, and when he would get to the top of it, it was so light that he would come off of it. The wind would catch it, blow it around the opposite direction.
Oh,
It was like riding a piece of plywood or something. The wind would catch it, and it would flip him around, and he'd be heading the other direction. I mean, this is a full-size bass boat with a 200 Mercury on it, and needless to say, he did that twice in front of me, and I'm like, yeah, he ain't gonna make it. It's a bad deal, but yeah, Charlie, you're right. You ain't
Charlie's
gonna make
right.
it. We pull back into the narrow gap where it's calm, and I said, what do you want to do, buddy? I said, yeah, that looked pretty damn scary to me. He's like, yeah, you ought to be in it. And his partner's sitting over there just shaking, And he says, maybe I can follow you. And I said, well, that's up to you, dude. I said, I'm going in. And he said, well, do you have them? I said, yeah, I got them. I said, I caught them again as good as yesterday. And I said, I figured with the way this wind's blowing, there's going to be a few of us not make it in. And he said, oh, don't say a few of us. He says, I really want to make it in. I'm like, well, I said, I'll lead the way. I said, and about that time, one of the other fishermen come through the narrows, and he pulled over there to us and stopped, and he says, what are you guys waiting on? And we told him the story, and he says, well, I'm going. And I said, yeah, I'm going too. And I jumped up on plane, and that guy got behind me, and we came in. And Charlie, the guy that was in between us, made comment when we got in. He said, yeah, I think he touched me a time or two,
Staying close behind you.
He said he was right behind me, He said, I turned around and looked one time, and I was scared. I thought he was going to get in here with us. And Charlie said, yeah, I stayed tucked in there pretty tight. I'm like, but anyways, we made it in.
Yep. Similar story. It was at Grand Lake. And it was first day of takeoff. I think I was boat number 12, 200 boat field. It was a Little Everstar tournament. And the wind was coming down from Sailboat Bridge to Shangri-La. It was coming out of the pipe, and they were 6-footers, I'd say 5'6", but they were really rough. So one of the guys in the front said, hey, I'll break water. And he said, let's don't get ourselves killed. Let's all get in a nice row, and we'll run down, and when we get to Shangri-La, we'll all fight for boundary. So we all made the agreement. It was all great. And from Sailboat to Shangri-La, it was maybe, what is that, a 5-6 mile run?
Maybe.
And it was nice. I had a nice, pleasant drive. I had a nice co-angler. He was a young African-American man, very outspoken. Like, really he was charged. He's like, we're going to whack him today. We're going to get him. He's like, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, I'm just drinking my coffee, buddy. Just hold on, man. We're good. Because my goal was to get to Governor's Island because I had found some really good spotted bass over there. And so we just had to go around the corner was it. So we're going down. There's, I don't know, 30 or 40 of us, I guess, because the rest of them ran upriver because we made bad decisions. If you don't know Grand Lake, that's kind of the way that works. So you either win big or lose big. But we got down to the three-way, or what you call it, in the Shangri-La turn, and everybody just kind of split off. Well, I'm going right, and everybody else is going left. Well, if anybody knows or ran Ranger boats, especially in the 2000 to 520 era, those boats were not the fastest out there. Very great riding boat, but pretty heavy. But they would go really a good average boat, about 66 mile an hour. But you get those guys, all their hopped up stuff, they go 70, 75. So they're going to try to pass you on the outside, as always. So as I go to make a turn to the right, I don't realize this guy's shooting up behind me on my right side. So as I'm turning, he comes around and he just cuts her right in front of me. And when he does, his rooster tail goes from my bow directly over the entire length of the boat and clears us. And we just make a pass like this. So I turn my right, here turns left, and for a moment, I saw my entire life. I mean, I thought I was dying right there. And we passed through, got to the island, I shut down, and I'm kind of shaking. I don't know if you've ever seen that, gotten that close to one in that vicinity, but it's not a really good feeling when the rooster tail sprays off your windshield and he shoots through and you dodge death by about 2 feet. And we pulled into the dock and we shut down. And I'm sitting there, I'm kind of composing myself, and my co-angler says to me, dude, dude, he just like this, dude. That was the badass thing I've ever seen. Dude, you drive like a rock star. Did you see that? I mean, he was like that. You drove like a master. Dude, that was amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it was, wasn't it? Let's go
just
fishing.
that good.
I'm like, yeah, it's all good. And I'm going like this. Yeah, I got this. And pick up my rod.
Part of the experience.
Thank God we're jerkbait fishing because I'm ready to go. And true story, it's called Governor's Island because the governor, I think, of Oklahoma had a mansion on an island right there. You remember that?
Yeah.
It's a big house. It may not be the governor's. They called it Governor's Island because I think that's the reason. You know what I'm talking about, Bill? Anyway, there's a big dock on the back side where they have the like cruiser stuff, and I had clown jerkbait on. So everybody said that's what you do down there. You either catch sand bass or you catch a good Kentucky. And I threw in there, and on the very first cast, my very first day of never starting on Grand Lake after doing that, I caught a 6-pound spot. It was like 512.
Holy crap.
First cast, landed it, and I thought, man, this day is on fire. Only fish I caught. The rest of the day, didn't catch a fish, but it was great to catch fish like that because it was a super stud. In my book, it was a super stud.
Yeah.
Doesn't count for anything, but that's my wake story.
I got hit once, running wide open.
Yeah.
We was at the Red River, and at that point in time, it was a couple years after I'd won, but we were down there for an FLW tournament. And the pool where we took off was just bad. You just couldn't catch one hardly at all, and so everybody was locking down, 60, 70 boats at a time in the lock, which they're big enough locks, but they're it's dangerous when you come out of that lock, 70 boats. Everybody getting on plane pretty close to the same time. It's dangerous. Well, we're coming back up, and I'd played the lock just perfect. And also, I take great pride in knowing how to play the lock. You don't want to be the first one in. You want to dummy up and kind of be about the 10th boat or so in, because when people pull up to the very first tie-ups, especially when you're going to have 60 or 70 boats in there, you got to use all the available tie-ups, and people raft up, go across the lock. Well, if you're the first one in, you're going to be up against the wall, and there's like 7 or 8 other boats going to tie up to you, which it tears the hell out of your boat up against that old concrete wall as you're raising up. So I get in the lock, and and at that point in time, I had a pretty fast boat. My boat was running good, and it was everything was working good, and I had a pretty nice stringer of bass. So I thought, I'm gonna be at the crack of the door, because that's where you want to be. The ultimate place is for your nose of your boat to be at the crack of the door.
There's no wake rules either.
Well, yeah, there is.
You just get past the gate.
Yeah, but if you're the one at the crack of the door, as soon as the door cracks open wide enough for you to go, you can go.
You can go. Yeah.
They want you out of the lock, but you can't get on plane until you idle 100 feet or something like that. So I dummied up, and I let a few people pass me. Guys are like, hey, did you get them? And I'm like, yeah, a little bit, I'm letting these guys pass me, and I'm like, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I pull up. And when I pull up, perfect, crack in the door. My partner says, you did that intentionally. I'm like, hell yeah, I did it intentionally. What are you talking about? He's like, well, that's pretty cool.
Did you do that? Did you not understand who I am?
Well,
did you play that one?
Yeah. But I played it just right, and I'm at the crack in the door. And there's only a choice little handful of people that get the crack in the door. Okay, you got to either be O.T. Fears, which O.T. Fears was a federal game warden in the river, Mississippi River, for 20 years, so he knows how to play.
So he knew how to play crack. Yep.
Hank Parker, Roland Barton, Guido Hibden, or me. We know how to play them locks. So I'm at the crack in the door. Needless to say, the lock fills up. I mean, there's 70, 80 boats in the lock. And I told my partner, I said, this is a good deal. I said, at least we don't have to run through all of these guys' boat waves for the next 10 miles till we get to takeoff. And he says, yeah. He said, we're going to have to go straight to takeoff. I said, yeah, it's going to be close. And because when people go to getting in, they don't tie up right. And if you don't tie up, they won't let you go. They won't shut the doors until everybody's tied up, secured. And so by the time they got the doors closed, I'm looking at my watch, and I'm like, shit, that's going to be close, And but good lock master. I mean, he pulls the plug. There's water coming in that son of a gun. We're going to the top. It's just racing. And I told my partner, I said, untie from that son of a bitch. He said, well, we can't go yet. I said, just untie. I said, just be ready. And he untied from that side. I untied from this side. And we're sitting there hanging on. And the door starts cracking open. Well, I just put her in gear and push up against the door. And the door's widening up as I'm squirting into it. And as soon as that door was wide enough for that 518 Ranger I was in to squirt out of, I go. And I'm idling just as fast as I can go. But you have 70 other boats right behind
Fixing
you.
to come down your ass.
Right behind you, I get on plane, and I go for about a mile, and I'm staying ahead of everybody because my boat's running pretty good. But still, 200 yards behind you, there's at least 20 that's all clustered up, fighting each other's waves. But they're right there on you, I look to my left, and here comes Harold Allen. Harold Allen, in our lifetime, there's never been a bass boat ever run any faster than his in a bass tournament, because if it was, he'd spend $10,000 to gain a half mile an hour. That's the kind of guy he was. I look over to my left, and here's Harold creeping up on me, which he always had faster boats, but I'm staying right with him. I look up here coming out of a backwater and coming out of an oxbow. There's one oxbow that's got about a half a mile stretch before you hit the river and go right. I turn around and look this way, and there's 10 boats 200 yards behind me. I look back this way. Harold's right here beside me. And I look over at Harold, and I look back ahead, and Harold points to that guy. And I'm like, yep, we got to watch, because that guy's not letting up. He's fixing to come in, and I guess he thought he was going to beat everybody. He was going to you don't make those kind of turns. You don't make 90-degree turns in a bass boat unless you end up in a circle, okay? That just doesn't happen. And he was in a Ranger boat, and I've got bad news for you. They will bow hook as fast as any of them. And I'm going as hard as I can go, and I think I'm still going to beat him to the turn. And Harold, I look over at Harold again, and Harold he's like, come out, and I ease out, and we ease out 200 yards from where we were going to go around that thing. And this guy never checks up, hits the river, turns right. And when he turns right, his back corner of his boat hits the front end of my boat, knocks me just to the side a little bit. I look over at Harold, and Harold's gone. Harold has taken for the woods on the opposite side, because he thinks there's going to be a giant. He thought there's going to be a giant boat crash. I look behind me. Everybody's kind of backing off of him. This son of a bitch keeps right on going. He keeps right on going. Got me wet. I mean, so needless to say,
got you pissed.
Oh, we got to the weigh-in. We get up there towards the weigh-in. Well, I got about 10 minutes before I got to be the weigh-in. I thought, well, I'm going to try to catch one. And so I stop and I fish for the last 4 or 5 minutes and then go on to the weigh-in. We get to the weigh-in, and I pull in, and the turn director's standing there. Hey, Dion, how you doing? I said, I'm doing pretty good, Bill. He said, wow, how'd you get wet? I said, well, there's some bitch here that's going to get his ass kicked. And he says, what? And I said, yep. I said, I'm hunting this color boat, and I said, I'm going to find it. I said, I'm not going to stop looking till I find it.
Back corner's got my paint on it.
Yeah. And he says, what happened? I said, ask my partner. And I just kept on walking. And I walked up the bank, and sure enough, I found the boat, and he's nowhere around. Well, he's weighing his fish in. I stood there for 30 minutes or so. Bill finally walks up there to me, and Bill says, is this the boat? I said, this is the boat. My partner walked up, and he said, yep, that's it. He said, somewhere on there's some orange paint. And Bill says, well, how are we going to know that? And I said, Bill, this is the boat. I said, you've been in bass boats before. You know you can recognize one. And I said, guess what? I seen this one up close and personal. I said, this is the boat. He said, well, where's he at? I said, I have no idea where he's at. And then it dawned on me, that some bitch standing up there in the crowd, he can see me. I'm standing down here fixing to whoop his ass, and he's up there hiding in the crowd. Bill says, well, go to your boat. He said, go to your boat. And he says, I'll take care of it. I said, no. I said, you are not taking care of it. He said, well, if you beat his ass right here at this weigh-in, he says, I'm going to have to disqualify you. I said, by God, get her out, chalk her up, because it's happening. He says, no, you're going to have to wait till you get wherever else you launched. I said, nope, not taking a chance of losing him. He said, well, he ain't coming back to this boat. He said, would you come back to that boat? I said, no, probably not. He said, because he knows he's going to get one. Needless to say, it was some guy from Oklahoma. And really, what got me about it was he was an older guy. He was an older, a little bit older fella. And I walked away. Well, I'm not 20 yards from the boat walking in the opposite direction. He runs down there, jumps in the boat, and goes pull away from the bank. Well, I run down, jump in the boat next to it, and jump over in front of his boat. So it's just me and him in the boat. Bill's like, Dion, don't do nothing you're going to regret. I said, oh, I ain't going to regret nothing. And I got a hold of the dude, and he says, hey, you need to turn loose me. I said, oh, yeah, why is that? And he says, I don't know what the hell you're doing. I said, well, I'm the one you hit down the lake. So I didn't hit nobody. I said, oh, yeah, you did. I said, you see that little guy standing on the... And my co-angler is standing on the bank cheering me on, like, get him, hit him, And,
fight,
that's him, that's him. I know it's him, And I said, oh, I know it's him. And he sees Bill Taylor standing on the bank hollering. So this guy pulls back into the bank real quick.
Help me, Bill.
And Bill jumps up in the boat, and he grabs a hold of me. And I said, Bill, don't grab a hold of me, buddy. I said, I'm a little juiced up right now. I said, I'd hate to throw you in the lake and him. And Bill immediately pulls his hands off, oh, sorry, and he said, you just can't do that here. He said, you can't do that here. He said, and at that time I was in the Black and Decker, and I was a one-man team for them. And he says, man, this is a bad deal. He said, we can't do this. And I told him, I said, well, disqualify him right now. He said, what can I disqualify him for? I said, he was reckless. I said, he almost killed us. I said, what if he would have caused us to have gotten sideways? I said, there's no way that the 30 boats behind us wouldn't have run over us. And as soon as I said that, this little boy standing there, and he goes, whoa, and he starts throwing up over the side of the boat. I mean, then it dawned on him, holy shit, we almost died, and he throws up 2 or 3 times, and my partner's like, oh, hell, I didn't even think of it that way. I said, yeah, it's all them son of a buck. I said, it's not
we're
me.
About hitting the boat.
I said, it's not me. And I said, I don't care if I scuff fiberglass. I said, it's all those people behind us that couldn't have got stopped. And my partner from then on, he says, oh, yeah, you're disqualifying his ass some way, somehow. He said, you're disqualifying him or I'm going to shoot him. He said, we're killing that son of a bitch. And, and this old boy said, yeah, he said, I guess, he said, you're going to have to disqualify me. And Bill says, okay, you're out. And I never seen him again. He never came back, but it was, yeah, like I say, it was, that's too close.
Well, I'll tell you what, Amy said it best. You started weak, but you finished strong. So it was a good night. It was a good night.
Locks were a lot of fun.
No, we're out of time. You don't get much more.
Locks were a lot of fun. If you could get in the lock with Roland and Hank and Dad, it's reindeer games. I mean, it was complete reindeer games. I mean, Roland, we were going into Rodman. And
long or short?
It's pretty short.
All right, go ahead.
We were going into Rodman Pool, and at that time, there'd only be about 10, 12 boats going to Rodman on a day. And Roland or Hank won. I forget which one it was. But anyways, one of them got a crack in the door. Well, the other one was just out there floating around in the middle. Lockmaster, hey, you need to secure that boat. You need to tie up. And he's like, like you couldn't hear him. We could all hear him, He's on a loudspeaker, Needless to say, the door starts cracking. Whoever's at the door starts easing through the door, trying to scoot up. He's pushing so hard, he's throwing a wall of water. Whoever it was, Roland or Hank won, eases up behind him, and the old Mercury had a clamshell that closed around the deal. He idles up there to him and cracks him right in the middle of that clamshell. The motor cowling pops off, falls in the lake, and this thing immediately now it's roaring. When it's covered up, it's kind of quiet. It's just idling really fast. But when the motor cover comes off. It's just making all kinds of racket. Then he turns around, his motor covers fell off. He gets off of it. When he gets off of it, it immediately recoils back. That guy goes through the crack in the door and gone, leaves. I thought, that's the coolest thing I ever seen. That is so cool. How did he do? I did not know that would happen, Needless to say, the next day we go in, same deal, same bunch of guys. The one that had done the hitting got the crack in the door. I'm like, why the hell would he even do that? He has no protection, whatsoever.
Gonna get it again.
Needless to say, the guy that he knocked his motor off of, he just idles up there to him before the locks even closed and fill him with water. Idles up there to him, whack, hits him in the back, clamshell breaks up, falls off. Only this time, knocked 2 spark plugs off.
Oh.
So now he can't go nowhere. Now he's defenseless, He is down to a 4-cylinder, and he can't get on plane. And I thought, that's bad. These guys are really, really unpleasant to play with, And that's when I learned, don't jack with them two. They got way too much money, They don't care. Hank had one of the faster bass boats. We was going to Lake Griffin, and they got a place called the Dead River that you have to run through. About 10 miles of a cypress swamp that you have to run through. But it's got a very defined little channel in it. Lots of neat little bends and twists and turns. Well, at that point in time, I had the fastest Ranger boat on the circuit. Just had one that worked. Everything was perfect on it. Well, I make it to the Dead River first. I break into the Dead River. Well, Hank Parker, there's no wonder why his kids were in NASCAR, because he liked going fast. Well, he couldn't understand how he couldn't make his Ranger boat run as fast as mine did, so he was aggravated at me all the time. When we broke into the Dead River, Hank is 200 yards behind me, and that's because I passed him from the last idle zone to the Dead River. Got around him. Oh, it aggravated the hell out of me. We get in the river, and I'm making the turns as fast as I can, staying off the trees. I don't want to hit a tree. And I'm driving her as hard as I can, going up through there. And finally, my partner hits me, and he says, he's going through the woods, and I'd look over to my right. He cuts out through the damn cypress trees. I'm not talking just a cypress tree every now and then. No, it's a forest. And he's driving this dude through them trees, just cutting back through them trees. Get to the next little corner, he just whoop, right out in front of me and right onto the lock. Like, holy crap, that's the craziest SOB I ever seen.
And the coolest.
The neat thing about Hank Parker is, besides our roommates that traveled the country with us, Hank Parker's one of the only guys that actually came to Missouri and visited my dad in the nursing home.
That's cool.
Spent 2 days with him. So, pretty cool dude.
Right on.
Boat driving mofo.
All right, so that concludes I've Seen Fire and I've Seen Rain. On the fire side, and we might talk about it next week, and might not talk about it at all, but I don't talk a lot of industry news anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been stir out there that Bassmasters is considering rule changes for next year. Have you heard that one?
No, I have not.
We'll talk about that one off the air, and we might talk about it next week. Big changes coming from what I'm hearing.
Huh.
So, yeah, see?
All right.
There you go. And then I'm going to do a little research on what a couple of the older legends of the lake have been talking about lately on the tournament industry. So we'll talk a little bit about it. Well, next week will be guest show. We'll have a guest on. Got a few lined up, so I'm not gonna tell you guys yet because we had fun last week. It was good. A little bit of wildness.
Yep.
We'll find somebody lame this week, so kind of tone it and balance it out a little bit. Super shout out to Lloyd and June over at Hiawatha Beach here at Lake of the Ozarks. A great place to go and hang out at the Little Buffalo. So if you're in that area, give them a shout. And we want to thank them, of course, for being a sponsor. For everybody watching online, thanks for subscribing to YouTube, and our YouTube live channel is growing. It's nice. And again, thanks everybody for showing up live. And you're always welcome to come here to the beautiful town of Lori and check us out. So for all of us here at Real Unfiltered Talk, we'd like to thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next Wednesday around 6, if I can get Dion at the chair at the right time. So other than that, appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. I didn't even get to tell my best story.